Hey everyone, welcome back to Engelbard Gaming. I'm trying another new series because hey, why not? This time I'm going to look at 6 video game sequels that really dropped the ball. Some were a bit of a letdown, some were pretty bad, and some were downright terrible. I'll show you a bit of the original game, or at least prior one in the series, talk about its awesomeness. I'll follow that with a bit of the sequel that didn't work, and we'll talk about its crapulence. Or at least why I felt it didn't work. Oh, well, you might think you'll see Golden Axe 3 in this video. If you think that,
well, you're wrong!
There's no need for a bunch of setup here, let's get on with it. Okay, if you're a fan of the channel, you know I love Final Fight, especially the arcade version. I think it is, bar none, the best scrolling beat-em-up ever to grace the arcade. Final Fight was a revelation in 1989 when it came out. That was the same year Golden Axe came out. Now, I also love Golden Axe, but Final Fight's visuals and intensity were just an order of magnitude above Sega's classic weapons-based brawler. Final Fight had gigantic characters, loads of animation on the main characters, incredibly detailed backgrounds, up to a whopping 10 enemies on screen, and a pretty good soundtrack. The home ports or conversions of Final Fight really ran the gamut from terrible to pretty great. The Sega CD was easily the best console version for a very long time. Note the word console there. The Super Nintendo version was okay visually and from a gameplay standpoint, but had a lot of stuff cut out. It was only one player, Guy was missing as a playable character, and an entire level was removed. Aside from that, gameplay-wise, it felt good and was pretty well done. Final Fight Guy later came for the SNES that added Guy back into the game, but removed Cody. The arcade version is king here. The Sega CD version is great, as is the X68000 version that I know someone will bring up if I don't mention it, and the SNES version I would say is still pretty good despite those cuts. And yes, I do know about the homebrew Genesis version, which is still in progress at the time of this recording, so you can stop typing that comment saying I didn't mention it. Now, Capcom did SNES owners slightly dirty with that SNES Final Fight because of the things I mentioned before. It played fine, but with only a few enemies on screen and one player, it was kind of a lonely, emptier experience than the arcade game. In 1993, Capcom released Final Fight 2 for the SNES. I remember seeing screenshots in magazines and really looking forward to this one. It would be a year or two until I played it after it came out, and when I did, holy cow, did Capcom drop the ball on this one. Final Fight 2 isn't a sequel, it's an apology. Here guys, you have 3 characters now. Sorry about last time. Here guys, you can have 2 players at the same time now. Sorry about last time. Here guys, you can have 6 levels now. Sorry about last time. What the game doesn't have is good art direction, a good soundtrack, or a shred of originality. This game is ugly, dull, dreary, boring. It's just a real slog to play through. I just can't imagine how most of the stuff in this game got approved. Didn't anyone test this or play it before it came out? Every single aspect of this game needed refinement, and it is easily worse than the original in every conceivable way. Despite the lack of 2-player mode, I'd much rather play the SNES original Final Fight than this garbage. Huge letdown. Avoid Final Fight 2 like the plague. Next up, we have Gradius III, or Gradius III. I'm going with Gradius, deal with it. Now, you guys know I like this game if you're a fan of the channel. I think the SNES version is much more accessible than the arcade version of the game, which is insanely difficult. The arcade one came out in 1989, and it looks and sounds great. It's a fun game that's sort of ruined by just how insanely difficult it is. On SNES, the difficulty is way toned down. Some sections are completely removed, and others are moved around. Both versions have a ton of slowdown in them. The Super Nintendo one gets a lot of flack for its slowdown, but to be fair, it was just about as bad in the arcade original. Still, the gameplay, the stages, the music, everything was so good that it was hard to put this one down, even if it was super hard. It was a solid evolution of Gradius 2, and because of its issues overall, Gradius 2 is still probably the better game, but there's still a lot of stuff I love about this one. Gradius IV didn't come along until 1999. That's 10 years after the last one, for all of you keeping score. In the interim, there were a few other games in the series, most notably Gradius Gaiden, but that's not a quote-unquote proper sequel, since Gradius IV continues the numbering. Now, I had heard that Gradius IV didn't live up to the series before I got a chance to play it. I shrugged that off and figured I'd still give it a try when I had a chance, because I like to form my own opinion on games. I eventually got Gradius 3 and 4 for the PlayStation 2, and that was the first time I tried it. And, well, the consensus was kinda right about this one. The visual aesthetic was just kind of off with the switch to fairly low detail polygonal graphics. It gives the game sort of a generic and bland feel, sterile almost. Some people complain stages are too similar to prior games, but really Gradius was kinda known for that sort of thing. The music just doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel like the prior fully 2D games in the series. And Gradius IV is not a terrible game by any means. I'd say of all the games I'm covering in this video, it's actually the best of the disappointing sequels. But as a big sequel that took 10 years to arrive, it's hard to argue that Konami didn't drop the ball with this one. For Gradius IV, you don't have to avoid it too hard. If you're walking on the same side of the street, just try not to look it directly in the eyes. Alright, here's another of my all-time favorites. If you're a fan of the channel, you know I love Strider. I've done more individual videos of Strider than any other game up to this point. I have comparisons of the arcade versus the Genesis, 2 of those, the arcade versus the arcade card on the PC Engine, a complete trash for the Amiga version, and a complete trash for the Sega Master System version of the game. I've discussed its complicated reputation with people trying to rewrite history and say that it's a terrible game for some reason. And just no, bad internet, don't do that. That's a lie.
Stop it.
Strider was a game that was absolutely amazing when it came out in 1989. There was nothing like it. Your acrobatic, ninja-like hero named Strider Hiryu could practically scale any surface, get whirled around by satellites with their own gravity, walk on ceilings in some rooms with reverse gravity, and fight a host of hugely memorable bosses and enemies. Strider is an absolute masterpiece that easily earned its EGM 1990 Game of the Year award when it was ported to the Sega Genesis/Megadrive. Strider is practically a genre unto itself, and one of gaming's most classic arcade titles. Now, Strider had a few sequels. None of them were all that great. Capcom's official Strider 2 is easily the best of that bunch, but it just felt like it missed some of the point of the original in a lot of ways. Mitchell's Cannon Dancer Osmond, which I've covered on this channel before, is an unofficial follow-up made by a few of the same primary developers, and they tried to rekindle some of that flame, but fell short for a number of reasons. But the worst sequel, without a doubt, is the god-awful Strider Returns, which came to us courtesy of publisher US Gold and the developers at Tiertex. Ugh. Strider Returns fundamentally misunderstands basically everything about what made the first game so fantastic, and it absolutely tarnishes the character. Now I'm going to show you the Genesis version of the game here, which by all measures is the best version of Strider Returns, but there's a lot of versions of this game, and they're all terrible. Did you like the slopes and angles and all that stuff from the original that you could climb? Gone. Memorable enemies? Nah, let's go with mostly generic robots and objects, along with some random copy-paste enemies from the last game, but we'll make them look worse. Cutscene graphics are reused, so on the Genesis version, the game runs in a constant state of slowdown, and is just incredibly sloppy. The levels are long and boring, and almost completely devoid of anything exciting to do or look at. The memorable music from the arcade original Strider is gone. It's replaced with a bunch of dull, barely there stuff that will be shunned by the most boring of elevators. Avoid Strider Returns like you know it's going to ask you to co-sign for a loan. Here's Taito's Rastan. It was released all the way back in 1987. I remember playing this one and being mesmerized by its amazing music in particular. Which, by the way, I made a Genesis cover of the main level song that I'll be uploading to my music channel later this week. Now, Rastan is a good game. It's not an absolutely great one, but it's a solid, fairly early side-scrolling hack and slash with sufficiently interesting levels. Each stage is sectioned off into 2 areas and ends with a boss fight. Couldn't say that about everything that came out at that time. It had a few decent ports. One of the more accurate ones back in the day was actually for the Apple II GS, a computer very few people owned and even fewer played games on. The most well-known port is probably the one for the Sega Master System/Mark III, which is pretty well done for the hardware, but it is pretty truncated and limited a bit by the hardware. There was also an MSX version that was pretty well done, though it's all flip screen, meaning that there's no scrolling. It's pretty similar to the SMS version otherwise. And the less said about the Western computer versions of the era, the better. There's an upcoming Amiga homebrew version that looks pretty nice, as well as a few projects hoping to bring the game to the Genesis/Mega Drive in different ways. And then look at this. Look at what Taito did to Rastan. This is Rastan 2, and just look at it. It's got a huge but doofy looking main character, weird looking enemies, a much weaker soundtrack, awkward play mechanics, and is seriously lacking in every way. I can't imagine that there is one person on this earth that would rather play Rastan 2, aka Nestar, aka Nestar Warrior, aka Rastan Saga 2, instead of the original. It adds multiple weapons, which is an interesting concept, but it is executed so poorly like everything else with the game that it's hard to extract any enjoyment out of it. Rastan 2 actually had a few console ports. There was one for the Genesis/Mega Drive that we actually did get in the US. As a port, I mean, it's okay. It's pretty faithful to the source material, despite understandable cutbacks to background tiles and stuff that were done for cartridge size. As a game, it still kinda stinks. Then there's the PC Engine version, which was only released in Japan. It's worse than even the Genesis version. If you're curious to see just how easy it is to ruin a budding franchise, here's your textbook case study. There was another sequel released in Warrior Blade, which is a dual-screen beat-em-up. It looks nice, but honestly doesn't play super great. It's way better than Rastan 2 here, but the original is still the best. If you've never seen Rastan 2 before, you've seen it enough here, trust me. For this one, I'd suggest you avoid it like that guy or girl at work that you know is always going to start a conversation that never stops. Here's Double Dragon, the granddaddy of the scrolling beat-em-up genre. Its first real major hit, actually. Now, I know it wasn't the first game in the genre, but it was the first in the genre to really garner popularity. If you weren't around at the time this was released back in 1987 when it was kind of innovative, it's gonna seem quaint after I describe it. We have two brothers named Billy and Jimmy Lee. They go off to save Billy's girlfriend Marion, who is beat up and kidnapped by the Black Warriors, sometimes also known as the Shadow Warriors. And, well, that's it story-wise. That's all you need to know. There are 5 levels in this game, 4 main missions, and 1 submission to invade the enemy's base. So it's short, but very sweet. The graphics, sound, music, and gameplay were all fantastic for when it came out. Yes, it had a lot of slowdown and stuff in it, but for this one it actually still played good despite that. Now, there are ports of Double Dragon to loads of systems and computers, and the quality of those ports is just all over the place. Looking at contemporary ports, ones that came out roughly around the time of the arcade game, I still think the NES version plays the best. It also had the best music of the era, but it lost its 2-player mode and the level layouts are very different and they added platforming sections, which some people hate. The Sega Master System version supports 2-player simultaneous, but has loads of flicker, and worse, sloppier gameplay. There's problems with collision and just the way that moves work, but the level layout is more similar to the arcade game. The Western computer ports are essentially all gutter trash that should be avoided like 2026's lovely explosive diarrhea lettuce. And if you're watching this sometime way in the future, this was a real thing. Now, Double Dragon has several sequels. Double Dragon 2 was okay. I wouldn't really say it dropped the ball, even though it was a bit disappointing. But when we get to the next one, hoo boy! Folks, this is the arcade version of Double Dragon 3 released in 1990. One of the most insidious, evil arcade games to ever exist. I remember being all excited when I walked into the local arcade called the Wizard of Oz, and they had just received this game. I walked up to it and immediately saw it was kinda ugly with super choppy sprite movement. It didn't look anything at all like the first 2 games, or like it was made by the same people or anything. Then when I started playing, wait, what's this, a shop? Oh, let me walk into that. Hey look, there's a bunch of power-ups in there, neat. Wait a minute, you need to insert more real-life quarters into the machine to buy the power-ups? That's right, it had microtransactions back in 1990. Now, contrary to some reports on the internet, Double Dragon 3 was not the first arcade game to do that. It was beat to the punch by a whopping 8 years by a little arcade game called Lost Tomb. I can't find any examples of microtransactions earlier than that, but if you can, let me know in the comments. Now, aside from the microtransaction bullshit Double Dragon 3 just wasn't a good game. The level design stunk. There was really almost nothing to them. The concept was super weird for a Double Dragon game. You were globetrotting to find the Rosetta Stone to revive Marion, and as you go through the game you go to different countries and then you end up fighting your final boss, who is Cleopatra. Yes, that Cleopatra. Yeah. Great game, guys. Every single thing about this game is awful. All of it. There are some fairly accurate home ports that fix the sprite movement and microtransaction problems, like the Genesis/MD version, but it's still a terrible game. Avoid Double Dragon 3 like you owe it money you don't have and it's looking for you. Contra, my gaming comfort food. For this last game, I'm going to talk about two NES titles. The NES version of Contra is an absolute classic, better than the arcade game on which it's based if you ask me. The arcade Contra is alright, but on NES it's much more refined. The structure is better, the movement is better, the aspect ratio works better for the game than the vertical aspect ratio of the arcade original, and the gameplay is just super tight, and the music is absolutely classic. I blow through this game without losing a life probably at least 10 to 15 times a year. Sometimes more, especially if I'm testing out new hardware. Now, Super Contra, or Super C, that's the first sequel that came out, and it's fantastic. Arcade Super Contra is one of my favorite games ever. NES Super C is really good too. But then, it happened. What is it? Well, folks, it is Contra Force for the NES. The game's so bad that Konami didn't even bother releasing it in Japan for the Famicom. Now, I've done a complete trash episode on Contra Force before, where I play this game from start to finish with commentary going all along. I'll link it on screen and in the description below if you want to see the whole sordid affair. So what exactly happened here? After two stellar NES Contra titles, how could Konami have thrown this slop at us? Well, Konami started development of a game called Arkhound that was supposed to be its own thing, and it even showed up in previews in Japanese magazines. And the game was finished. Clearly, Konami knew they had a stinker on their hands as they chose not to release the completed game in Japan. But they did decide to gently retool it, stick the Contra name on it, and release it in the US as Contra Force. So what's so bad about it? Well, the gameplay is just not Contra. Sure, it has side-scrolling and overhead levels like Super Contra or Super C, but the intensity is dialed way down, and a lot of the weapons stink, and you often have to advance very cautiously instead of quickly, revealing bits of the screen at a time so you can see where enemies are standing, so you don't get blasted when you're in one of your very slow jumps. There are some levels that are a bit more maze-like also. It also has lots of slowdown when there's almost nothing on screen that should be causing it. It is a badly made game that really isn't any fun to play through, and some of these levels are outrageously long. I can kinda see in concept what they were going for, but it just doesn't work. This game is not made to their usual standards. No, instead, we have Contra Force, which is a stain on the Contra name and a game that no one should play. Avoid it like that pile of laundry that you swear you'll get to someday. So there we are, 6 awesome games with sequels that drop the ball, some way more than others. It's always hard to recapture the magic of a huge hit. Some companies never manage to do it. Others have varying degrees of success. The 6 games I showed you here today all just failed in some way or another to build on the success of what had come before them. There's way more I could have covered here. Gaming is littered with terrible sequels to great games. Tell me if you like this concept and you want to see more videos on this topic down the road. I'd like to make it a series like I mentioned at the beginning of the video. We'll see how this one does before I make any decisions. Alrighty folks, your turn. What are some more sequels that you think really dropped the ball? What do you think of the games I talked about in this episode? Did you like any of them? Am I wrong? Was I too harsh? Tell me all about it in the comments. That'll do it for this video, my retro gaming friends. If you enjoy the video, please like it and share it online somewhere. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so you won't ever miss any of my videos. If you want to support the work that I do here, you can do that on Patreon, Ko-fi, or right here on YouTube through things like Super Thanks and channel memberships. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.